records are in relation to a patient named Karen Reed that visited the Good Samaritan on January 29th, 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with reference to, can I approach again, Your Honor? Just
Yes.
Sure.
your attention to a previously tapped portion of those records. Do you see a result for alcohol within those records?
Mr. Lally, you have to keep your voice up when you're here as well.
Let me say it again, sir. Doctor, with reference to those records in the page that I've opened up to, do you see a record in regard to a lab result for alcohol testing with regard to Ms. Reed?
Yes.
And what is it reported as, sir?
It is reported at 93 milligrams per deciliter.
And is that, as far as milligrams per deciliter, is that a relatively standard way of reporting an alcohol result?
Yes, it is in our hospital systems.
Could you explain to the jury sort of milligram per deciliter what that reading means as far as the metric that's used there?
Well, it means 93 milligrams of alcohol per deciliter of the blood.
And as far as, if you could explain to the jury sort of the testing process or the protocols that are in place at the Good Samaritan, so the blood is drawn by the phlebotomist, and then what happens from there as far as the testing is?
Okay, so
Right, but before you do that, doctor, so we might have to turn off the fans, which we don't want to do. I really need you to keep your voice up so that the court officer over there, so that folks down there can hear you.
okay, so at Good Samaritan, I can go through the process. The doctor will order the test in the emergency room. We have 2 phlebotomists down in the emergency room. That test will print out, the order will print out down in the emergency room. And it will print out a label for the blood tube. It will print out on that label the color of the blood tube to be ordered, and will also print out what on the label what is to be tested in our lab. So that order will be seen by our phlebotomists in the emergency room. They will then locate the patient and perform the venipuncture or the blood draw, and use the correct tube. They'll go through their process of one of the most important processes in testing somebody's blood is accurate patient identification. So within our policy, we ask the patient to state his or her name, first and last name and date of birth. We have them say it out loud to make sure we have 2 forms of identification. Once that's confirmed, there is also a bracelet on the patient, so we'll match it up with a Good Samaritan ID number. So the first step is to make sure we have the correct patient. So then the phlebotomist has the order in front of her or him and uses the correct tube. Make sure before drawing, they have to find the correct vein, a good vein for the patient, which is usually in the forearm antecubital fossa area. They will find that vein. They will cleanse the area with a non-alcohol swab, which in this case the order was for alcohol.
All right, so doctor, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you. I think part of it is that you're saying so much and your voice is fine, and then it drops, and it's fine, and then it drops. So Paul, can we turn the fans off, please? It's important that all the jurors hear everything you say, doctor.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so but speak into the microphone.
I'm going to bring it really close.
All right, this should be better with
and hopefully you can turn it back on when I get better at this. So I'm sorry. It's hot. I'm hot too. One is we make sure that it's correct patient identification. We use the correct tube. We draw it. We don't use an alcohol swab. We use one that doesn't contain an alcohol in that. Then the phlebotomist will then put the labels on the tube or tubes in front of the patient, then bring it back to his or her area. Make sure they sign their name on, they initial their name on the tube, as well as the time. Then it will be put into a bag, and in the emergency room, it goes through a chute and it goes directly to our laboratory for testing. Once we get it, it's called receiving the blood work. A technician, a lab tech in our lab will scan, there's a barcode on the label, they'll scan it, and that will document the time that we received it. They will also manually enter the name of the phlebotomist and the time of the blood draw, so we have accurate records of what we received and the time. Once that's done, it's entered into our system, and then the technician will decide what needs to go next. In this case of an alcohol test, we're using a green top tube, which has lithium heparin, has an anticoagulant in it. It's to prevent clotting. So we'll get that tube, and once it's entered, we will centrifuge it. And that is centrifuged for about 10 minutes or so, so that we can separate the layers of the blood. In the blood, when you first see blood, it's all red, and there's no separation of the elements. But within blood, there are red blood cells. There are white cells or inflammatory cells, and there's the liquid portion of the blood. So for alcohol testing, we there's an anticoagulant in it, and so we will centrifuge it to separate the different layers of the blood. The different layers, the red cells will go to the bottom, and the aqueous portion or the plasma portion will go to the top. And when we test for blood alcohol in our lab, we're testing the aqueous portion of the plasma portion of the blood. So that's why it's important for us to centrifuge it and separate the components. Once that is done, that takes about 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer. Then that tube will be brought over to our machine, which is a Roche Cobas machine, and it will be put onto the machine, and that machine will test for the alcohol or whatever else is ordered on the patient. I think I covered everything.
Now, with regard to, you used the term a couple times as far as a centrifuge, can you describe to the jury sort of what that is and how that instrument works?
Sure. So when the tube that we take is a blood tube, and we want to test the aqueous plasma portion of the blood, and the only way to get that plasma portion or the watery solution of the blood is we put it in a centrifuge, which will spin the blood at a rapid rate, something like 3,300 RPMs or so, which is fast, and it will separate the blood into those three layers. Also, in the tubes that we use is a gel that comes in the tube, and it nicely separates the red blood cell component from the water or aqueous plasma component, and keeps those two portions of the blood separate to make it easier for us to test on our machine.
Now, as far as the blood testing is concerned, is there a difference between sort of what's known as whole blood versus serum and plasma?
There is a difference. Whole blood is basically the whole blood. When somebody has a test drawn, and if we test something on the entire blood without separating it, that would be whole blood. If we say we're testing on plasma or serum, we're actually separating the components of the blood by the centrifuge process.
Now, which of the two, as far as serum plasma versus the whole blood, which would record as far as a higher percentage of alcohol in the testing?
Alcohol, the answer would be plasma or serum would have a little bit higher blood alcohol content compared to whole blood.
As far as the separation that you're talking about, is there a specific area as far as the separation is concerned where alcohol tends to concentrate within?
Yes, alcohol tends to go into the more into the watery or the aqueous component of the blood. So when we like serum or plasma has a 98%, reportedly 98% water component. Whole blood, if you look at the whole blood overall, it has a lesser percentage. Some, if you look in the literature, it can be 86% or there's a range. But so since alcohol tends to go to the watery components, if you measure alcohol like we do in hospitals on the serum or plasma, the value that we get will always be a little bit higher than total, than measuring on whole blood.
Aware of, through your training and experience, sort of a conversion that can be done between sort of what's reported as a testing from the serum plasma to a whole blood count?
In the hospital, we're pretty much in the business of, reporting alcohol, in serum or plasma, and we're not in the business of the legal, I guess, the legal aspects of alcohol testing, because alcohol, what I understand is the alcohol legal limit in Massachusetts is 0.08 grams per deciliter. We don't make any conversions in a hospital. We're not in that business to do that. We just report on the serum percentage or the plasma level, and we don't make any attempts to do any official conversion to a whole blood level. If we did, we'd have to validate, we'd have to do many studies, and we're just not in the business for that.
And I understand that's not how it's reported within your record or at your facility. What my question is, are you aware of a process by which you can sort of then mathematically convert from milligrams per deciliter to a gram?
I am aware of that. Recently, I had to read about it, but up until recently, I was not aware. So I'm not in that. We're not in the business for whole blood. But there is a formula. I do know about it, and it's there is a if one wants to convert a whole a serum or a plasma level to a whole blood, there are formulas that basically you need to. It's a simple formula, but there's varying opinions on which formula can be used.
Now, as far as this specific patient, the defendant, Ms. Reed, do you have any sense from the chart in front of you as far as sort of the timeline of when the blood was drawn to when it was tested and reported and things of that nature?
I think it was the order was 9:03 in the morning. 5 minutes later, the phlebotomist, it happened pretty fast. 5 minutes later, the phlebotomist got the labels printed. Then 5 minutes after that, they went in and drew it. It was very quickly. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but ultimately, it was received in our lab, I think, 10 minutes after the order, the blood, very quickly. And then the final result, when the alcohol level was reported in the computer system, was, I think, 50 minutes from the time of the order.
Thank you, sir. May I approach?
Yes.
Okay.
And that lab results done pursuant to the testing and the policies and the protocols and everything in your lab was 93 milligrams per deciliter. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you, doctor. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You testified that, hospitals are not in the legal business of calculating BACs. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes,
And you'd agree that there are differences between screening tests that are conducted at hospitals and forensic tests that are done in labs, correct?
correct.
And the purpose of testing in sort of a clinical setting at a hospital is to assist in the quick diagnosis and treatment of a patient. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And so your priorities may be different than those if you're at a forensic lab where the goal is to ensure accuracy and reliability at all costs, correct?
I don't agree. Not correct.
Well, hospitals use serum tests to screen for the presence of alcohol, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that serum testing does not measure alcohol directly, but it actually measures the presence of NADH.
Correct.
And NADH is the byproduct that's created when the body breaks down alcohol.
Correct.
And the reason hospitals use a serum test rather than a whole blood test is because it's quick and efficient and you can get test results within 20-ish minutes. Does that sound about right?
Correct.
And you'd agree that NADH, which is what serum essentially tests for, can also be elevated by factors other than alcohol in the blood.
I'm not aware of that.
Are you familiar?
Yep.
Are you familiar with any medical literature that has found that NADH is created when the body has elevated either lactate or LDH in the system?
Correct. There are some issues, in our policy. There are some factors that can lead to falsely elevated or falsely lowered serum alcohol. One is lactic acid or LDH. Another one is Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, which is a hematological problem, and other things that can interfere with not just any test or lipids, high levels of lipids, or hemolysis, or high levels of bilirubin. But our machines are very sophisticated now. If there are any elevations of, let's say, hemolysis or lipids or bilirubin, the Roche machines will detect that and flag it as a possible interference, or it won't even let us result a test. So with any test, there can be interferences, and I'm sure there can be interferences with the forensic way of testing as well.
All right, so there are other causes of high levels of LDH and therefore NADH also include things like trauma, muscle weakness and loss of muscle tissue, or abnormal tissue formation. Is that correct? Have you read studies about that?
I haven't read those studies, no.
Would you agree that there may be other sort of medical stressors or things that can't necessarily be captured by the technology, but that could cause error in testing?
I don't understand that question.
Well, you testified that there can be certain errors in testing. That's something that we see throughout all different types of sort of scientific literature, which includes ethanol testing.
Yep.
And there are certain sort of factors that could cause a higher level of NADH that might not necessarily be picked up by the machines that you use at the hospital. Is that correct?
I am not familiar. If there is, it's not not a common phenomenon. Our methodology for doing many tests are based on this NADH enzyme methodology, and we've never had issues with it. I read a lot. I haven't read about major faults of our methodology for testing. Most hospitals, when we look at, when we actually have to do proficiency testing with any test that we do in a hospital. So 3 times a year, we get sent unknown levels of alcohol and 5 samples to be accurate 3 times a year. And we're able to look at not only our results, make sure they're correct, but we're able to look at how, what other hospitals are doing across the nation. So when I last looked, and it's held true for over 10 years, maybe 20 years, is that of the, I think, 5,000 hospitals that are testing for alcohol, it's over 80% of them are using our methodology, which is the alcohol dehydrogenase and NADH. And I can't imagine if, why, if there were any major issues with alcohol testing using that methodology, why would, it wouldn't be that high of a,
As you
Yep.
test, the goal in a clinical setting, obviously, is to test for the presence of alcohol, but you're not in the business of trying to sort of calculate BAC, correct?
no, we don't. We don't.
So your goals are to make sure that you're screening for the presence of alcohol, but you're not quite as concerned with the precise amount that you might see in, for instance, a whole blood test in a forensic lab.
Well, we result in terms of in the serum. We know the Massachusetts laws and laws across the nation are based on whole blood, but there are in the literature formulas that you can use if it were a medical legal case that one can use to convert our level to a blood alcohol. We don't do it in a hospital. We won't report a serum alcohol and then we don't do the conversion, but because it's a very rare event that that a level will end up in court. But there are forensic lab people that can provide that that formula.
And when you get a test result from a serum test, that information does not establish when alcohol was consumed, correct?
Correct.
And so you're just looking at a specific point in time to say this is what the serum test reflects at 9:08 a.m. on January 29th.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Mr. Lally, any follow-up?
Just briefly. As far as the interferences or anything that would lead to elevated levels from your review of Ms. Reed's chart, was there anything like that present there?
I didn't see anything. No.
And the interferences would be accounted for in the sense of the machine would sort of vet them out and not result or not recorded in the chart if that were to occur. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
The form of the question, I'll sustain the objection. You can ask it differently.
Sure. Dr. Fowler, with regard to the interferences that you were talking about, what, if any, impact would that have on the results being reported?
If there were the 3 major things that could interfere with the result, like high lipids, hemolysis, or high bilirubin, our machine would flag that, and we would have some information that a result may not be valid. And sometimes we will report a result with a disclaimer, or sometimes if those levels are so high, we won't report it at all. But in this case, there were no flags.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything, Ms. Little, or are you all set?
If I could have one moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Just one moment, Your Honor. other questions?
All right, Dr. Fowler, thank you, and I'm sorry I gave you such a bad
Oh,
time about
okay,
your
I'm
voice.
sorry if I, thank you.
Thank you. Your next witness, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth will call Mr. Nicholas Roberts to the stand. Your Honor, may we approach just while the witness is coming in?
Yes.
Unmuted.
Do you solemnly swear the evidence given to the court and jury in the case now hearing true, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You can have a seat. I just need you to keep your voice up really loud. If you're too soft, we're gonna have to turn off the air conditioning. Everyone's gonna get mad at you.
No problem.
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury, sir?
Sure, my name is Nicholas Roberts, Roberts.
And what is it that you do for work, sir?
I'm currently employed with a company called Thermo Fisher as a field service engineer
And how long have you been doing that?
since November of last year.
And so prior to that, or prior to November of last year, 2023, where did you work before that?
I was in the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the toxicology unit.
And how long did you work in the toxicology unit at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
Since October of 2014.
Now, if I could turn your attention to prior to joining the lab for the Massachusetts State Police, can you talk a little bit about your educational background? Where did you go to school and what did you go to school for?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in applied forensic science with a concentration in chemistry and toxicology from Mercer University. That's in Erie, Pennsylvania. And then I also have a master's degree in forensic toxicology from the University of Glasgow in Scotland.
Now, after receiving your degree from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, where did you go from there?
I returned home to the British Virgin Islands where I taught at a community college,
And what did you teach there?
mainly chemistry and a term or two of physics.
And then following your teaching in the Virgin Islands, where did you go from there?
I was hired then at the Mass State Police Crime Lab.
Now, when you're initially hired at the Mass State Police Crime Lab, you're working initially as a forensic scientist 1, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what your duties and responsibilities are, what your work looks like as a forensic scientist 1?
So a forensic scientist 1, you're essentially going through all the trainings that they provide at the lab. We do a number of different tests, and mainly on blood and urine, looking for the presence of drugs and alcohol. We also do serum conversions and retrogrades. So during your training period, I started as a FS1, so that went up until I was fully signed off to actually write reports that would be issued to ADAs across the whole of Massachusetts, in which I became a forensic scientist 2.
And so what are the difference, sir, between sort of your work as a forensic scientist 1 versus your work as a forensic scientist 2?
So essentially as a 2, you're essentially fully trained and you're able to do all the testing that we do in-house. You also are able to go and give testimony based on the reports that you write, whereas in a forensic scientist 1, you're still in that training process.
And did you work essentially as a forensic scientist 2 from that point in time till the time that you left the lab in November of 23?
Yes.
Now, with reference to while you were working at the lab, was there sort of an ongoing, continuing educational component?
Yeah, so we would habitually receive articles based on different discoveries within the forensic field. So different ways they would find certain types of drugs in different bodily fluids. It's always a revolving door when it comes to drugs being discovered as well as being manufactured, what's illicit on the street, et cetera, et cetera. We would often get different articles, just research papers based on what they're doing to discover these things within the matrices that we are looking at.
Now, in addition to that, while you worked at the lab, what if any sort of, are you familiar with the term proficiency testing?
Yes.
And what if any proficiency testing would you undergo while you were at the lab?
So we receive both in-house and external proficiency tests. Essentially, the process would be just the same. The only difference would be we'd have internal people sending us samples as if it came from an external source. And then the external proficiency testing that we receive is actually part of our accreditation. So it came in just like regular samples, and we would test it accordingly per our protocols.
And as far as the proficiency testing that you undertook over the course of your time at the lab, did you pass each of those tests?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned a little bit as far as accreditation with regard to the lab. What, if any, accreditation did the State Police Crime Lab have?
We had accreditation. It's a internationally accreditation board for forensics scientists, as well as any kind of lab in particular, and the branch that our lab would have fall under. We have a certain set of rules that we have to adhere to. Mainly, it's a standard known as an ISO 17025. But we have a different accreditation board, and they have narrower requirements because of the type of lab that we are.
It may be pretty well understood, but that as far as the accreditation is concerned, that's done through an external entity. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the lab, as far as your assignment of work, at the time that you left the lab, about how many forensic scientists were working within the lab in your toxicology?
By the time that I left?
Yes.
Oh. So within the toxicology unit, there was one more when at the time that I left.
And as far as you and sort of the other forensic scientists too, the time that you worked at the lab, was there some sort of rotation, or how were you assigned work as it related to your work in the toxicology?
So throughout my time there, we had more forensic scientists, ones and twos, and we would delegate each type of assignments that we would look for to different types of testing. On a monthly basis, we would get a different group of tests that we would perform throughout that month, and it would rotate to the next person as the month at the end of the month. So that's how we did the testing.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to May of 2022, you're working with the lab at that time, is that correct?
Yes,
And were you assigned to serum conversions at that particular time?
I was, yes.
And at some point were you specifically assigned to a case involving a Ms. Karen Reed?
Yes.
Now, as far as a serum conversion is concerned, if you could explain to the jury sort of what goes into that process and what is it that you're reviewing or you're looking at, how is a serum conversion, what is it, and how is it performed?
Sure. So with serum conversions, usually what happens is that we get hospital results. So that would be the police or the ADAs would get results from the hospitals that whoever was attended to. We get the results, and usually hospital alcohol results they use serum in order to test alcohol. Serum is essentially the liquid portion of blood. Let's say, for instance, you fall and you cut yourself, that red stuff that comes out, that has serum within it. What the hospital does, they centrifuge it or spin it very fast in order to get the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and all kinds of the heavier materials out of that blood. And what's left is a serum. So they use that to test their alcohol. What studies have shown is that we actually tend to have a higher alcohol concentration in serum than in blood. So what that means is that due to the chemical nature of alcohol, it likes to stay in that liquid portion more than throughout the whole blood. So a serum conversion essentially is able to convert the alcohol content from that serum that we get from the hospital into what it would be in whole blood.
And did you have occasion to perform a serum conversion in regard to Ms. Reed's medical records?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a document, just ask you to review that with something finished. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
So this is the serum conversion report that I made with the calculations were made on May 3rd of 2022.
And as far as the result that you received, in addition, so what kind of materials did you receive in order to perform that analysis?
We got the medical records.
May I approach the witness again?
Yes.
I apologize, Your Honor. If I could, looking for the exhibits. So I want to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 106. And directing your attention to this last page contained within this document here. Is that a portion of the medical records that you reviewed in regard to Ms. Reed's serum alcohol level?
Yes.
And if you could, what was reported in the medical records that you reviewed and using in your serum conversion analysis as far as the level?
The level was at 93 milligrams per deciliter.
And so with regard to that 93 milligrams per deciliter, I'm sorry, was there also a time that specimen was collected as far as your review of those records?
Yes.
And what was that time, sir?
It was at 9 in the morning, 9:08.
Now, as far as just in terms of the general term, as far as forensic science, what you did at the lab, can you explain what that term means or what you did in relation to that?
What do you mean specifically?
That was very poorly phrased. Let me try to restate that a bit. What is your understanding of forensic science? And can you explain that?
Oh, forensic science is essentially a scientific study based on anything dealing with the law. So whether it comes to ballistics or DNA analysis or toxicology, like I did, anything focused or based on the law or for legal purposes, essentially that's what forensic science kind of encapsulates.
And forensic toxicology, would that sort of be a subset of forensic science?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what your understanding based on your training and experience, what is forensic toxicology?
So toxicology in general is essentially just a study of poisons, plainly speaking. So anything that'd be harmful to the body, essentially that would be toxicology, because you also not only have forensic toxicology, but you also have like environmental. And the forensic toxicology is just, like I said, again, with the forensic science, it's just basing it on things for legal purposes.
Now, through your training experience, are you familiar with sort of the difference between a serum plasma level versus a whole blood level?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what your understanding is of each and what, if any, differences there are between the two?
So Just plainly your serum plasma level, or the serum plasma is what it's called. It could be referred to as either or one or the other. So that's it's just the alcohol level in your serum, whereas your whole blood is your alcohol content or regular BAC in the whole blood. This difference between the two is, like I said previously, in your serum or plasma, that alcohol content would be higher as it would have been in the whole blood.
Now, as far as the milligrams per deciliter, how that's reported in the Good Samaritan medical records referencing Ms. Reed that you reviewed in this case, is that typical as far as how hospitals would report sort of the serum plasma levels?
Yeah, from my experience and all the times that I've seen serum conversions come to the lab, milligram per deciliters are the units that they use from the hospital. Yeah.
Now, as far as that 93 milligrams per deciliter, what, if anything, with regard to serum conversion, what, if anything, are you then able to do to convert that to a BAC or a blood alcohol concentration?
So based on some studies, they came up with a few different conversion factors, knowing that the blood alcohol content would be higher than the serum plasma content. They're able to apply different conversion factors to the numbers that we would get in serum. And we usually get, excuse me, we usually give a low, an average, and a high, being that it's kind of hard to say what one particular person's conversion factor would be between the two of them, since it's dependent upon like age, sex, the water content, what you had to eat that day. So it's harder to pinpoint. Therefore, we give a good range as what it could possibly be pertaining, just in case a person converts, or their conversion would be a lot lower or higher. So we give a good range.
And as far as those different conversion factors, where do those come from?
It's based on some studies. I don't remember the actual names of the papers that were thing, but they were based on studies throughout the forensic world when it comes to looking at specifically testing blood and serum to find that conversion factor.
And as far as those studies are concerned, do they come from sort of different population bases? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's how they were able to get the range of conversion factors that they use.
Now, as far as the water within the serum, or sort of how that works with the centrifuge, what, if any, relationship does that have to the reading that you get or the conversion factors that you use?
So the water content, essentially, if the serum being the liquid portion of the blood, water is also liquid. It makes up some of that serum that you would get from it. Therefore, your higher water content, more essentially, the lower the concentration could be of that, or lower or higher, depending upon whether or not your water content in that sample is lower or higher.
So as far as those different conversion factors that you're using, this is essentially a mathematical calculation, is that right?
Yes.
And so the different conversion factors that you're using for the low, the average, and the high, what are those conversion factors?
So the low is a 1.18, with the average being a 1.14, and then the high being a 1.12.
So based on your analysis, as far as the medical records of what was reported to you, using those three conversion factors, what, if anything, did you come up with as far as the low and average and high for the 93 milligrams per deciliter?
So our values that were calculated for the low was a 0.078 gram percent. The high was a 0.083 gram percent, with the average being a 0.081.
Now, sir, with reference to the alcohol that's reported in the records, are you familiar with, are there different types of alcohol?
Yes.
And can you explain sort of what those types are and what the differences are, or where they come from?
Sure. So there are multiple different types of alcohol, mainly based on the number of carbons that are within that molecule. You start off with methanol, which is one carbon. Methanol you can find in like some rubbing alcohols. You can find them in many different labs. You have big, large vials of them. Ethanol, which has two carbons. That one is the common one that is in our alcoholic beverages, and it goes all the way up isopropanol, octanol, etc. It all depends on the number of carbons in the chain of it.
And the type that's reported within Ms. Reed's medical records, that was ethanol, correct?
Correct.
And so, with regard to your training experience as a forensic toxicologist, you're familiar with a term known as a central nervous system depressant?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that term means and how it relates to alcohol?
Sure. So alcohol is what is classified as a central nervous system depressant, and essentially the name kind of gives it away as to what it does. Your central nervous system is responsible for essentially all your movements, both involuntary and voluntary. So the way you move your head, the way you blink, the way you breathe, the central nervous system is responsible for all of that. With a depressant introduced into the body, it affects that central nervous system, causing things to slow down. So that's essentially what depressant means. It's going to slow down certain processes that a central nervous system would be in charge of. So you can have delayed reaction times. It can cause drowsiness.
Ask another question.
How would that manifest as far as a central nervous depressant affecting the body?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
Go ahead.
There are many different effects that you could see or side effects from having a central nervous system depressant in the body. Lethargy, sleepiness, drowsiness, unable to walk properly, any kind of any one of those tests that you see on TV from the police when they try to get your horizontal gaze and they try to make sure you're coordinated, it can affect all those things.
Now, sir, are you also familiar through your training and experience of working in forensic toxicology with a term known as retrograde extrapolation?
Yep.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term to mean?
So a retrograde extrapolation is essentially another calculation, but it allows you to be able to calculate what the possible blood alcohol content would have been at a time prior to when the blood was drawn. Say, for instance, blood was drawn at 2, you could essentially figure out what the blood alcohol content would have been at 10 in the morning prior to it.
And that's done with the calculation as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what are some of the types of information that you would need to know or that you would want to know in order to perform a retrograde extrapolation?
We'd need to know, one, for sure, what the alcohol content would have been. We also need to know the time that the blood was drawn, as well as the time of the last alcohol consumption.
Now, in regard to timing, as far as what, if any, limitations are there in regard to performing retrograde extrapolation as it pertains to timing is concerned?
So when we do these calculations, anything that's shorter than 2 hours, we usually don't do that conversion.
And why is that?
Because we're built in within our calculations, we allow for 2 hours. That has to do with the way that alcohol leaves the body. If the alcohol is still being absorbed by the body, we want to give it enough time to get to a point where it's coming out of the body as opposed to increasing in the body. So that 2 hours puts the person at a point in which that alcohol be coming out as opposed to it being absorbed.
So there are essentially 3 different sort of phases as far as intake of the alcohol into the body through dissipation. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are usually there's a well-known kind of metabolism route to which alcohol metabolizes out of the body. Yes.
And so, can you describe to the jury sort of that metabolism process as far as how it starts to its end?
Sure. So with having, let's say, 1 drink, what the body begins to do at that point is absorb the alcohol. Usually you get like a steady line that increases with time. So if you think of a regular chart where you have the level of alcohol in the body versus time, which would be on the y-axis or the x-axis at the bottom, as time goes along, after your first drink, the body starts to absorb the alcohol. If that was your only drink and that was it, the body then at a certain point, it stops absorbing it because there's no more to absorb. and it plateaus. So essentially the line goes straight. After that point, the body starts to eliminate it at this point. And then your level or your concentration of alcohol within the body decreases with time as it's getting rid of it.
And so there's sort of the absorption phase, the plateau, and then the elimination phase. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that in the course of your analysis for retrograde extrapolation, it's important to know sort of when the last drink was. Is that right?
Yes.
And why is that?
That way we can get a good time in and figure out the amount of time that has passed between the last drink as well as the time that the blood was taken.
Now, did you perform a retrograde extrapolation analysis with regards to Ms. Reed's BAC or the converted BAC from the serum conversion?
I did.
And so with reference to Ms. Reed, as far as you looked at obviously the hospital records, you looked at the serum conversion report, what, if anything else, did you review or look at in coming to that retrograde extrapolation analysis?
We usually get a police incident report, and that usually identifies the time in which, per their narrative, what time in which they had the last drink.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
So again, presenting you with the document, if you could just look at that and look up and finish. Do you recognize that document, sir?
I do.
And what do you recognize it?
This is the retrograde extrapolation report that I did for the subject of Karen Reed.
Now, with respect to the time that you utilized in that report, as far as when was the time that you utilized as far as the last drink or time of operation?
The time that was utilized as the last drink, it was at 12:45.
That'd be 12:45 a.m., is that correct?
Correct.
And so you're using that to sort of extrapolate from 9:08 a.m. when the 93 milligram per deciliter is reported from Good Samaritan to 12:45 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to that 12:45 a.m., what, if any, difference would it make if it were a little bit off of that? Say it was 12:30 a.m. or it was 1 or 1:10 a.m. What, if any, impact would that have on your conversion?
So we tend to go by hours. So we kind of round to the nearest, I think, 15-minute interval. So a couple minutes or 10 to 20 minutes forward or behind of that 12:45, it wouldn't change the results by a lot, if any.
And similar to the serum conversion, is this done with different conversion factors as far as a low, an average, and a high?
So we usually just calculate a minimum and a maximum for the retrograde, and that incorporates some conversions as well.
Now, as far as the minimum versus the maximum, what of each of those sort of signify, or how do you come to those mathematical calculations?
So with the minimum calculation, we incorporate the 2-hour period. So we assume that maybe that 12:45 wasn't, the body wasn't at that point finished with the elimination. It wasn't in the elimination phase, so we allow it for 2 hours ahead of it. We also have a conversion factor. Once again, this is a study that was done to see the elimination rate of different people within a population, what rate they would get alcohol out of their system per hour. So we implied the lower limit, which was a 0.1 gram percent per hour, with that 2-hour allotted time interval, and then we use the lower serum conversion number, the one that was converted on the lower end. We use all of that in the calculation in order to come up with the minimum. The maximum one uses the opposite, so it uses the higher converted serum conversion number with the higher elimination rate, using the full amount of time.
And these calculations or these conversion factors are all based on sort of medical studies that you reviewed in literature that goes into your training?
Yeah, all of it was part of the training, and they came up with those numbers prior to even when I was hired there. But it is based on multiple different studies in that, looking at that elimination rate.
And so from your calculations when it came to the minimum with regard to the retrograde extrapolation, what if any calculation, what if any result did you come from with your calculations as it pertained to the minimum?
So the minimum amount that was calculated would have been a 0.135 gram percent.
And that's essentially recording in a blood alcohol concentration, is that correct?
Correct.
And then with regard to the maximum, what if any result did you get from your mathematical calculations in regard to that?
The result was a 0.292 gram percent.
And so that range that you receive is a bit of a wide range. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And why is that?
So we base those calculations. They're based on that conversion that I did from the hospital results from Serum, giving us a good range of values in the first place. But then we incorporate the retrograde extrapolation one, which uses a time factor, and that 2-hour difference using two different elimination rates, that causes a wider span of values. And it's just so that it can encompass essentially anybody within the general population, that they would be somewhere in between that lower limit and that upper limit.
So essentially from those mathematical calculations, anyone within sort of the general population with that result would be somewhere between the 0.13 and the 0.29, correct?
Correct.
May I approach this to retrieve your arm?
Yes.
I could have one moment, Sharon?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Okay. Ms. Little?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You used a method called retrograde extrapolation to reach your sort of opinions and conclusions in this case, correct?
Yeah, it was a calculation.
And that means that you rely on an assumption that a trend will continue beyond sort of observable data.
So the metabolism is actually pretty well studied. So we know that that elimination rate, unless you introduce more alcohol into the system, it declines at that rate, and it's pretty linear.
Exactly. So in other words, certain assumptions are incredibly important for you to reach your analysis.
Sure.
And that includes sort of the timing of the very last drink that the individual had. Is that right?
Yes.
If your drinking pattern is sort of different than what you assume for purposes of your calculation, then you'd agree that your entire extrapolation would be incorrect. Is that right?
Yes, it could be.
And again, those assumptions sort of included the time of the incident, right?
Yes.
And importantly, the time of the last drink.
So those two will be what we use. It's the time of the blood draw as well as the time of the incident or last drink.
And your report acknowledges that the testing that was used to obtain ethanol results in this case was not performed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
Correct.
And for that reason, the report and those results do not fall under your forensic lab accreditation standards.
Correct.
The Massachusetts State Police, as you testified, is an accredited forensic lab.
Yes.
And so you're required to meet certain minimum standards in order to uphold that.
Yes,
And you'd agree that those accreditation standards are different from accreditation standards that, say, a hospital lab might have.
they can be.
And do you ever work on testing within the Massachusetts State Police Lab for serum tests or whole blood tests?
So we did test the blood and serum for alcohol content at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab. Yes.
And their typical protocols are to use whole blood tests.
We use whole blood or serum.
In terms of the machinery that's used with the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, you'd agree that the gold standard is gas chromatography and mass spectrometry machines.
Usually with a
Actually-
headspace
I'll
detector.
let it, go ahead, you can
Sorry.
answer that.
Usually with a headspace detector. Yes.
And that would detect whole blood rather than serum.
No, it just detects any volatile substance.
But you'd agree that a serum test usually, as you testified, has a much higher level than whole blood.
Yeah, due to the nature of the substance itself.
And so you kind of have to go through this extra step of trying to extrapolate, okay, how do I convert this to get to whole blood?
So what we incorporated anytime we had a serum sample submitted to the lab for alcohol testing, we actually did the same serum conversion in order to figure out what the blood alcohol concentration would have been.
And that's an extra step that you have to take using conversion factors, correct?
Yep, there's a calculation.
You're not actually testing for ethanol in the blood, you're testing for NADH, and then you have to do a conversion to get it to what a whole blood test would just automatically show you.
Yeah, so we get the serum level and then we convert it via calculation.
And typically in the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, you would do what's called confirmatory testing.
Yeah, so we have a screening method as well as a confirmatory test, correct?
And confirmatory testing means that you take two separate samples and you test both of those.
Essentially, well, our protocol involved testing in duplicate, but that's not always the case for the other drugs that we tested. We essentially have a screening test, which is one type of test, and then the confirmatory test would be a separate test, or sometimes even the same test, just we run the sample again.
And the reason you typically would do two tests is to ensure that there's no error in the testing.
Correct.
And that acts as a fail-safe against false positives. You
Yes.
agree with that? And it also ensures that you're testing the correct sample.
Correct.
And in this case, obviously, you didn't conduct any of the testing.
Correct.
You're just assuming the accuracy of a single test that was performed by a hospital.
Actually,
I'll allow it.
yeah.
And so if the clinical results are invalid, then your extrapolation is going to be invalid.
Yes.
Now, we discussed a lot about sort of serum testing and conversion rates. Do you recall that testimony?
Yeah.
And you'd agree that the precise conversion rate between serum ethanol levels and whole blood ethanol levels is almost impossible to accurately predict.
For each individual person, it would be difficult. Yes.
And that's because the amount of water in our blood is scientifically impossible to predict with accuracy.
I'm not aware of any kind of test that would do that. So, yeah.
Because individuals are different, right?
Yes.
And so the conversions that you use are based on averages from scientific studies.
Yes.
But you'd agree that in certain instances, people can fall outside of that average range.
Yeah.
In fact, a comparison of hospital serum alcohol levels, they range quite wildly. You agree with that?
Yeah.
In fact, you're aware that some studies show that a conversion rate from serum alcohol to blood alcohol can be as high as 1.59%.
I wasn't aware of those numbers, but yeah, it could range. That's why we give a wide range, and you could lie on the outskirts of either side.
And so that would mean that the actual blood alcohol content, once it goes through the conversion rate, would be much, much lower than sort of the average conversion rate that you relied on.
Yeah, it could be both higher and lower.
And that includes that range that you gave, right?
Yeah, it could fall outside the range.
You'd agree that the more imprecise an extrapolation is, the less reliable it is.
Yeah, you do have to base it on good. Your starting blocks have to be good. So you have to know the times in which the blood was drawn, the time of the incident, and essentially what your value was for your BAC.
And the time of the last drink, you'd want to know that?
So we would put that around the time, yeah, either the time of the last drink or the incident date.
And so the more sort of unknowns you're trying to account for, you'd agree the less reliable your end result is going to be.
It could be, yes.
And you'd agree that sort of the range you gave in this case, which was 0.135 to 0.292, that's a very, very large disparity.
Yeah.
Almost a sort of 120% swing.
Yeah.
That would be the equivalent of, for example, predicting a child's going to grow somewhere from 6 feet to 14 feet.
Objection.
Sustained.
It's a very large number. You'd agree with that?
Yeah, there's a large range, like I said, due to the factors involved in the calculation. That's how it gets so large.
And that's because you're acting with a lot of unknowns in this case.
Yes.
Now, you testified that your retrograde extrapolation assumes that Ms. Reed reached the elimination phase of processing alcohol at or before sort of 12:45 a.m.
Yeah, we allow for, we start for the maximum at the 12:45, and then it would have been 2:45 for the minimum.
And so for purposes of your calculation, if Ms. Reed drank alcohol after 12:45 a.m. and before her blood was drawn at 9:08 a.m., your entire calculation would be invalid.
Yeah.
No further questions.
Hey, Mr. Lally?
Just brief, please. So in this instance, Mr. Roberts, you're dealing with a time of incident that was known, correct?
Yes, it was given to me that it was at 12:45.
And as far as the BAC or the serum conversion that was coming from a medical record, as far as, so that was known as well at 9:08 in the morning.
The time that the blood was drawn, yeah, that was known as well.
Now, as far as the question you were just asked, if the defendant drank alcohol after 12:45, does that include sort of shortly after 12:45, or how long after 12:45 would it take in order to affect your calculations or your retrograde extrapolation?
It's hard to say where that would have skewed it. It would have definitely caused a different time frame depending on how long after the incident or the reported last drink. If there was another drink in between there, it just shortened up the amount of time that would have been prior to the blood draw for sure.
What I'm asking is,
Yes.
the 1 a.m., would that significantly impact your calculation?
No.
Okay.
You all set, Ms. Little?
If I could just ask one question. You said that you were given 12:45 as the time that you sort of based your analysis on. And to be
Yes.
clear, that was not something that was provided to you by my client, right?
No.
That was something that was provided to you from a police report.
Correct.
No further questions.
Okay. All right, Mr. Roberts, you are all set, sir. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth to call Mr. Michael Trotter to the stand.
Me standing and face the court.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case now will be answered for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Michael Trotta, Trotta.
And where do you live, sir?
Sharon, Mass.
How long have you lived in Sharon?
Long in Sharon since 82.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I am the superintendent of public works for the town of Canton
And how long have you held that position as superintendent of public works?
since 2003.
And did you work for the town of Canton prior to 2003?
No.
Now, with regard to being the superintendent of public works, can you describe to the jury sort of what are your duties and responsibilities when it comes to that work?
Typical management duties of staffing, controlling, directing, working on the budget, working on scheduling, long-term scheduling, 5 to 10 years, capital planning, overall operations, the day-to-day operations, what it takes to maintain a water system, a sewer system, the road system.
Now, with reference to, if I could turn your attention back to late January, early February of 2022. At some point in early February, were you contacted by a trooper in regard to a blizzard that had happened the week before?
Yes.
And do you recall who that trooper was or how they contacted you?
I believe it was Michael Porter, and I believe the contact was by phone.
Now, with reference to that trooper, is that someone that you knew or you had spoken to before in any way?
No.
And prior to that date, did you know a John O'Keefe or a Karen Reed or anybody?
No.
And as far as anybody within an Albert family within the town of Canton, were you familiar with them? Did you know them at the time?
No.
Now, when you were contacted in that early February of 2022, with regard to the blizzard the week before, what if anything was the trooper asking you? What kind of information were they looking for?
He wanted to know what the procedure was when we prepare and staff a snowstorm.
And if you could explain to the jury sort of what is the procedure, or what at that time, what was the procedure and what was sort of the makeup of what Canton DPW would do with regard to a snowstorm?
Well, we have the town is divided up into, I believe, 29 plow routes, several main routes, and side routes. The routes are generally somewhere between 3 miles and 3.5 miles long. And we have 30, I think back then we had 39 pieces of our own and probably 30-something private plow trucks. We try very hard to have 2 trucks on a route, but we generally don't get enough. So if we try to have a town truck on a route with a private plow on a route. The private plow is procured through a bid process. They have to have a contract. They have to have insurance, liability insurance, and they have to show that they've paid their taxes to the state and that they have workers' comp. And they have a contract with the town. Then the operations manager is in charge of the on-site, boots on the ground, if you want to call it that. He'll assign the specific truck and the private contractor to a route. Generally, the day before, maybe 12, 18 hours before, the two of us talk. We try to schedule the overtime so that you're not going home at 3 o'clock and then you're getting woken up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to come back. We like to schedule it so when the guys go home, they know when they're going to come back. To the best of our ability, that's what we'll do. We'll tell the contractors when they are expected. And generally, if we're plowing, it starts with a sanding operation. So we would have a sanding fleet, which is maybe a dozen trucks. They'll come in early, and then the rest of the public works people come in at a scheduled time.
And so there'd be about, and correct me if I'm wrong, there'd be about 30 some odd trucks that were sort of DPW trucks.
A few more. I'm not sure the exact number. It's probably 37 or 38 because that counts sidewalk plows too. So there may be, I think there's 3 sidewalk plows. So there's probably 34 or 35, we'll say, between medium-sized trucks and the big construction trucks.
That was sort of my next question. As far as the DPW trucks are concerned, do they vary in size, or what is sort of the range in size of the town?
They'll go from a pickup, 2-ton pickup, a F-150 or F-250 Ford, if you're familiar with that, to a medium-duty 20,000 to 22,000 pound truck up to a large construction truck, which is generally 26, 28,000 pounds.
Now,
The large truck is a 6-wheel truck.
and as far as the other trucks, the private ones, those would sort of be subcontracted out through the bidding process, is that correct?
Yes.
And would the range, as far as the size of those trucks, would that be similar or something different?
They are pickup trucks, usually lighter pickup trucks. There may be a couple of front end loaders. There's probably, I don't think there's any big heavy duty trucks, but they're probably pickups, might be couple of Jeeps, pickups. Again, a medium duty like an F-350 or F-450 pickup. Those are Fords, and loaders.
Now, with respect to questions or what you were asked about by the trooper, was there a specific sort of street or plow route that the trooper was inquiring about?
I believe he asked who was down, that's Fairview, or down in the Cedar Crest area, that's what we call it. I believe that's what he asked me.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm showing you a document. You just look at that, look up when you finish. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, sir.
And what do you recognize it to be?
This would be a plow plan for that day. It's a plow plan for the season, but it is particularly a plow plan for that storm of January 28th through January 29 of 2022.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes.
I'm also seeking to introduce in a minute the next exhibit.
Okay,
I have no objection.
thank you. Exhibit 109. Thank you.
When it comes to that form for you that's now been marked as Exhibit 109, I just have a couple questions for you in regard to what's listed there. So with regard to the top of the page, there's a listing as far as 128, 2022 Boulevard, 11 p.m. You see that?
Yes, sir.
And what does that mean, sir?
That means that the first group of workforce, which would be the Sanders, were scheduled to come in at 11 o'clock that night.
Now, as far as the next entry going across the top of the page has 129, 2022, is that correct?
Yes,
And as far as what's listed as WNS/BM/REC at 2 a.m., what does that mean?
W and S would be water and sewer. BM would be building maintenance. REC would be the rec. And they are scheduled, that would be the balance of the Canton's workforce. They were scheduled to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning.
And that 2 a.m., would that be at the same sort of central location? of
Yes,
all
they
the-
would all report to the Bolivar Street garage. I think that address is 150 Bolivar Street.
Now, as far as the next listing, it states contractors at 3 a.m., is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And who is that referring to?
That would refer to all the private contractors that would be plowing that day. So again, it's staged.
And sort of the last sort of notation on the top of that, it indicates out at 5 a.m., 1:30, 2022. Is that correct?
That would be when we completed and everybody went home.
Now, with reference to the Cedar Crest neighborhood or the area that would include Fairview Road, there's different route numbers that are assigned, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And which route number would include that Fairview?
That would be Lower Cedar Crest, number 11.
And from that, that would include Lower Cedar Crest, Kings, Fairview, and Spring, correct?
Yes.
And as far as the vehicles and the vehicle types that were assigned to that route pursuant to this list, what types were they and who was assigned to?
Truck 30, which would be a town of Canton truck. That's a 43 International. Brian Lochran would be the driver. The 43 International is a medium duty truck. The next up would be 7400 International. That would be the large construction truck. And there is an absolute, a by the yard 4x6, which is I believe that's a small 1-ton dump. That would have been the private contractor that was on the route with the city truck.
And so that truck 30, the 4300 International, is that a bigger truck or a smaller truck than the 1-ton?
Then please again? Then the 1-ton?
Yes.
It's a larger truck. It's a, like a 3 to 5 cubic yard truck, and the large truck is like an 8 to 10 cubic yard dump. That's a dump truck.
And as far as the height on that International, would that be, how much would it be, taller or shorter than say a 1-ton dump?
If you want, I would estimate that if you're sitting in the driver's seat of a car, you're probably 2.5 feet. When you're sitting in the driver's seat of a 1-ton, you're somewhere around 3 feet. When you're sitting in the driver's seat of this 4300, you're probably somewhere around 4 to 4.5 feet. And when you're sitting in the big construction truck, you're another 8 to 10 inches, 5 feet plus.
Now, when you're driving, or when the plow drivers are plowing the roads, excuse me, what, if any, sort of instructions are they given as far as how to first start plowing the roads when they first come upon sort of dropping the plows and going?
If we're in a plowable situation, which is kind of hard to define, it's generally when we feel that traffic is impeded or may not be able to safely get up and down the street. So that's probably anywhere around 2 inches. They're instructed, and we're expecting a heavy snow. They're instructed to plow the middle of the road, keep the middle of the road open. And as they make their way through the route, they're supposed to push back a little bit. If they try to clean a whole lane and then come back and do the lane again, generally they end up being in trouble and they can't keep up if it's a heavy snow. So they're instructed to plow the middle of the road, to keep the roads open as much as they can before they do their finished cleanup.
If I may have one moment, Sean?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
All right, Mr. Yannetti?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Prado. Sir, Michael Proctor called you on February 3rd of 2022. Does that sound right?
It may be, I'm not sure of the date.
It was within days of the big snowstorm, correct?
Yes.
You knew that he was investigating the death of John O'Keefe, which had occurred on January 29th, correct?
I did not know that.
Had you heard that there was a police officer who was found dead on the lawn of another police officer in Canton?
Well, I knew, yes, I knew,
It was fairly big news at the time,
Yes.
correct? And were you aware that that was why Michael Proctor was calling you related to that investigation?
after he called and identified himself, he said that is why he was calling.
Of course. Now, you spoke with him over the phone only, correct?
Yes,
He never came down to the DPW to meet you in person, correct?
not me, no.
And he never asked to interview any of your employees, correct?
We may have discussed who was on that route and who plowed, but I'm not sure at that time if he had told me he was going to go talk to anybody else.
Oh, so it's your testimony that you may have told him the identity of the plow driver when you spoke with him on February 3rd over the phone.
I may have, but I am not positive.
You don't have a memory of him asking you who the plow driver was?
He asked, no, I don't have a memory of his exact questions.
But leaving aside the exact wording of his questions, it's fair to say you don't have a memory of him asking you who plowed Fairview Road on January 29th. Is that fair to say?
He asked me about, I believe he asked me about this plow list,
About the what? The plow list?
this plow list.
Right, but on the plow list, there's the name by the yard, correct?
Yes,
All right. There's also, to the left of that, an indication of the name of the plow driver, and it's just a first name and a last initial,
Yes.
correct?
yes,
It doesn't spell out the whole last name, does it?
no,
But you know the full last name, correct?
yes,
You have a limited number of employees, right? It's not a 1,000-person company, right?
yes,
All right. And you're well familiar that Brian L. is Brian Loft, right?
yes.
As you sit here today, Do you have any memory of whether the name Brian Laughlin was brought up during that phone call with Michael Proctor?
I may have said to him, that's who BL was, but I did I believe I referred him to the operations manager to double check who was on plowing that day.
Okay, you say you may have mentioned the name Brian L. or Brian Laughlin, but again, I'm just trying to drill down on what your memory is. Do you have a memory one way or the other as to whether the name Brian Laughlin came up in that conversation?
If you ask me, do I remember 100%? No.
Okay. In any case, Trooper Proctor, Michael Proctor, never asked to speak with Brian Laughlin when he talked to you over the phone,
He
correct?
did not ask me, no.
I'm going to allow the question and answer.
And how short was that phone call with Michael Proctor?
If I tell you, you're going to ask me, how do I know for sure? I would
Okay.
say a few minutes, whatever a few minutes is.
I'm going to accept that answer. And you would agree with me that after, and you, by the way, you were trying to be helpful, correct?
Yes,
After that couple or 3-minute phone conversation, you'll agree with me that Michael Proctor never followed up again with you personally.
that's a good question. I am not sure.
Okay. Well, I'd like to direct your attention to about a week and a half later, specifically the date of February 14th of 2022, which maybe you don't remember the precise date, but around that time period, you came into work around that time period, and you learned that a defense investigator named Paul Mikowski had left his business card for you with somebody on the DPW staff, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask it differently.
Yes.
I do not,
Sir, that means you
Oh.
don't answer that question. I think he's going to ask when that's an appropriate one for you to answer, okay?
Do you recall when you came into work receiving a business card from Paul Mikowski?
no,
Do you recall calling Paul Mikowski back?
no,
Do you recall speaking to any investigator from the defense at any point within a couple of weeks after you spoke to Trooper Proctor?
no,
Do you deny telling Paul Mikowski to call Bill Walsh?
Objection.
Sustained.
Who is Bill Walsh?
Billy Walsh is the operations manager for
Is he the Highway Department supervisor?
yes,
Did the name Bill Walsh ever come up in your conversation with Michael Proctor back on February 3rd?
Objection.
Did that name come up when you first spoke with Trooper Proctor?
Again, I believe I mentioned it, but I am not positive.
Is it fair to say that the Canton DPW has their own plowing and sanding trucks?
Yes,
Does one of them in particular have a nickname?
if they do, I don't know what they are.
Have you heard one of your trucks being called Frankenstein?
Objection.
Sustained.
You don't drive the trucks, correct?
No, I do not.
But Brian Laughlin does?
Yes, he does.
And Brian Laughlin was driving the truck that plowed Fairview on January 29th of
Yes.
2022?
Objection.
How many of them are?
Yes. It'll stand. The answer will stand, Mr. Lowney.
I may just have a moment. But... Sure. Can I approach
The witness or the sidebar?
the witness?
Yes.
Sorry. Do you have reading glasses as well? Or
Well, I have, yes, but
you're able to read the exhibit that you have in front of you?
yes.
Terrific. I'm handing you another document, sir. And I would ask if you would compare that document with the document you have in front of you and tell the jury if it's the same document or not.
It appears to be,
Does it appear to be identical?
yes.
I will take the one back that does not have the exhibit sticker on it. Thank you, sir. And I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any follow-up, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor, but may I just retrieve the exhibit?
Yes. All right, Mr. Chardo, you are all set, sir. Thank you very much.
All right.
You have another witness here, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, your next witness, please.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth call Mr. Louis Jutras to the stand.
Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the evidence given to the court and jury in the case now and here to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. I take the statement.
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Louis Jutras, Jutras.
And where do you live, sir?
Stoughton, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived in Stoke?
About 23 years.
And what is it that you do for work, sir?
I work for the town of Canton. I'm the manager of the Information Systems Division of the Finance Department.
And
The
how
what?
long
What
have you
was-
been
I'm
doing
sorry,
this?
what was the last part?
Of the Finance Department.
Thank you.
And sir, how long have you held that position?
Almost 25 years.
Now, if you could explain to the jury, just as far as your job is concerned, what does that relate to, or what is it that you do as a director of informational service?
Sure. So my responsibilities are for the municipal departments and all the technology associated with that.
And does that include everything sort of from cell phones to GPS in town vehicles to security systems, things of that nature?
Yes.
Now, with reference to your department, how many people work in your department?
There's 3 of us in total, myself and 2 others.
Do you essentially supervise the other 2 people as well?
Yes.
Now, at some point, if I could turn your attention to around the time of January 29th, 2022, some point after that, did someone from law enforcement or from a police department reach out to you in regard to security cameras or camera systems within the town of Canton?
Yes, I received a notification from the Lieutenant Gallagher that there was a motor vehicle incident in town, that the state police would be looking for some video footage.
And so you received an initial notification from Lieutenant Gallagher telling you that the state police would be reaching out looking for video.
Correct.
And at some point shortly after that, did you receive any sort of, did anybody from the state police reach you?
Yes. Trooper Dunn reached out. We had a phone conversation. And we had email correspondence relative to dates and times. We had pulled some footage from one site in Pequiside Farm that was put together. And then after that, there was a request for anything facing Washington Street, either from Town Hall or from the library.
And so as far as what was relayed to you by Trooper Dunn, what was sort of the description or what was it that you, were they asking just specifically timeframes or did you get any other information as far as what you were looking for?
From what I recall on it, there were 2 different timeframes between 12 and 1 and then between 5 and 6. That was in our discussion and correspondence relative to Town Hall.
And just to be clear, that's from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. and then 5 a.m. to 6 a.m.?
Correct.
Now, as far as the Equitside Farm,
Mhm.
describe to the jury sort of what kind of location that is or what kind of town property it is and where it is in relation to the town.
Yes, so the physical area is off of Pleasant Street, which intersects with Washington Street, closest to Dedham Street and the police department. That's a large area, big white house, and we have cameras that, face the entrance, the street, and the surrounding building.
As far as the coverage from those cameras, have you had occasion on either this occasion or prior occasions or subsequent occasions to look at sort of the view that the camera gets of Equitside Farm?
Yes, yeah, we have a straight shot down from the building, down the entrance driveway, right to the street. The other cameras that are around there's a couple of doorbell type cameras that physically focus on specific sections, and then other ones cover the general grounds around the building and the backside.
All right. So can I interrupt for a minute, sir? Could you please spell the name of the farm?
Yep, Pequiside, Pequitside.
Thank you.
Sir, is it, Mr. Jutras, is it fair to say that the Pequitside Farm cameras cover more of the property and less of the street out in front? Is that correct?
Yes,
Now, as far as that was the initial request was in regard to Pequitside, is that correct?
correct.
And so the subsequent request, what was that in regard to?
That was for anything town hall or library that physically faced Washington Street.
And so the town hall and the library, sort of where are they situated in relation to each other and in relation to Washington Street?
Yep, so they physically abut on either side of Washington Street, right at the intersection of Sherman. They are diagonal to each other.
Now, as far as the recording devices or the cameras on town buildings within the town of Canton, are they sort of uniform or does it vary from location to location or vary within the location?
The physical model of the recorder, as far as the manufacturer, that is the same that we have across 15 different sites. The types of cameras do change, interior, exterior, doorbell, things like that. But all the actual recording units are of the same manufacturer, just different sizes and models.
And as far as the town hall and the public library cameras, as far as the exterior cameras at least, they face in that area of Washington Street and actually capture portions of Washington Street?
Yes, yep.
Now, as far as the cameras are concerned, particularly the exterior cameras that we're talking about as far as the library and the town hall, how are they sort of set up to record? Is it one continuous recording? Are they motion activated? How are they?
Yes, the cameras, based on size and so on, they're all set up for motion in pretty much all of our locations.
And as far as from your review of those cameras, is there any sort of indication on the footage as far as date and timestamp or anything like that?
Yes, we usually have it in one of the corners or someplace along when we have the video saved off and exported.
And when you were able to pull the video that the troopers were requesting, the date and timestamp affixed to those videos, was that accurate as to what the date and timestamp actually was at the time that it's recording?
Yes, I would believe so.
And sort of those date and timestamps, you know where they come from?
The system is linked to a time server, which is remote and is used from the national standards.
Now, as far as the video is concerned from those, they're motion activated, but how far back do they go as far as how many days pass before, does it get sort of overwritten at some point?
Yes, depending on the site, most of them, because of the motion activated, because of, various request types and so on, and the number of the cameras, we usually try to get about 30 days. There are some that go longer because the site is or isn't used as much. And then there are other ones where, specifically with the library, they only requested to have a maximum of 30 days on that device.
And so when you received this request from the troopers, that was well within the 30 days, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, because we're talking February 7th for the last request.
Now, as far as the video that you exported, well, let me ask you this. As far as when you were asked to retrieve that video, can you explain sort of mechanically the process, how you got that video and how you delivered that to the troopers?
Yeah, so specifically for the town and the library one, that again, timeframe provided, using the manufacturer's software product, doing the search, picking the cameras that are facing the Washington Street side, and then having the time frame and exporting that out. That becomes, depending on the size of it, either a full executable that can just be opened and viewed, or a combination of files that has a player with it. And then based on the fact that we had already put videos together and that material was picked up, I had sent a file share link for that information.
You had sent that file share link to Trooper Dunn, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as the video that you reviewed, were you sort of parsing or were you looking for specific areas, or did you just sort of take the whole time period requested and send that off to the trooper?
As far as I recall, it was the whole time frame, just because we only have 2 cameras or so that physically cover the area in question. And he had 2 separate hours in question as well. So they were able to be exported and sent.
Now, as far as this particular video, this is video only, correct? There's no audio that's attached to these cameras?
Correct, no audio.
Now, as far as access to these cameras and the footage within the cameras, who, if anyone besides yourself, would have access to remove any sort of footage from the cameras?
No one.
Now, sir, before we get to the camera footage specifically, I just want to ask you about another area. In relation to also within sort of the ambit of your duties and responsibilities would include GPS on town trucks, correct?
Yes, Public Works has a setup via their radios for GPS information.
And so with regard to that, specifically the DBW trucks, what, if any, information did you receive from anyone at the DBW in relation to those GPS devices within the trucks shortly after the snowstorm from the 28th and the 29th of January?
Yep. So on February 1st, I received notification from the operations manager that the GPS information was not working.
And so you received information after the snowstorm that it wasn't working during the snowstorm, is that correct?
Correct.
And as far as that, as far as GPS sort of going down in the DPW trucks, is that abnormal, or how often would that occur?
Yes, it happens several times throughout the year for various reasons. They have a radio repeater. It's connected through a network. It runs software on a server that we have in-house. Server's rebooted, network goes down, things that, change for various reasons, and we need to reestablish connection to whatever recorder it is for that repeater, and then the information is then picked up.
Now, taking you back to the Canton Public Library video that you provided to the trooper, were you told anything about sort of any type of vehicle or anything to be looking for within that particular video time frame that they were asking about?
Not that I recall.
Did you recall ever actually watching the video yourself as far as confirming sort of what it was?
Yes, I mean, I watched it from the time frame to see that we had information, watched it just to move forward to the end to make sure there was information and when the recording, was physically available. But what was in it? No.
May I approach?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a disc, just ask you to, as far as that video from the Canton Public Library, you've seen that video subsequently, is that correct?
This disc with the wording on it?
Yes.
No, I have not seen this.
Not that specific disc, I'm sorry, sir, but the footage, have you been shown that particular video footage, or did you review that footage before you gave it to the troopers?
This is not mine to the trooper.
Understood. May we approach?
Okay. All right, so you both agree that this will be the next exhibit?
Yes. Yes.
Hand that to Madam Court Reporter. Sure, sorry. All right, so the parties agree that this is the next exhibit, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would just ask to briefly, publish
Done.
portions from those.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the first video portion from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. Mr. Jutras, from what's up on the screen, you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And as far as the view from this camera this is from the library, is that correct?
Correct.
And so as far as what we're looking at here, this is the view from the camera as you observed it on the security camera and as you provided it to the trooper, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, sir, do you have is there a laser pointer up on the desk?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with this area as far as the area of Canton?
Yes, yes. Town Hall is right across the street.
And I'm sorry, I stepped right over your words when you were saying that.
Yeah, so Town Hall is right across the street, and the intersection here is at Sherman, and this is Washington, the longer street that you'll see.
So Washington sort of runs parallel with the street, and then Sherman is the street that appears to intersect with Washington
Correct.
in the area of the town hall.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly, if you could take that down and then just put up the flag to again, sir, what's up on the screen? Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Is this essentially the video that you provided to the troopers or retrieved from the Canton Town Library from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. later on that day, January 20th?
Yes, sir.
And the orientation as far as Washington Street, Sherman Street, that's all the same in reference to the earlier. The camera hasn't moved.
Correct.
I may have one moment, Sean.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. I have no further questions, Sean.
I may proceed, Your Honor.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Judges.
Good afternoon, Attorney.
So confirming the state police, when they contacted you, asked for 2 hours of video footage, right? Between 12 and 1 a.m. on January 29th and between 5 and 6 a.m. on January 29th, correct?
Yes, sir.
You pulled that video footage, or at least arranged for it to be pulled for the state police, correct?
Yes.
And I believe your testimony was that you checked the beginning time and the ending time to make sure that you had the right time periods for those 2 hours, correct?
Yes.
But you did not sit down and watch 1 hour of snow falling and/or cars driving by the public library, correct?
That is correct.
Didn't
I
do
did
that
not.
for between 12 and 1 or between 5 and 6.
Correct. I did
All right.
not.
And at the time that you provided the video footage to the state police, did you know whether or not there was any missing footage within those 2 hours?
No. Because again, I did not play every single second of the video.
Understood. It's fair to say, and you're certain, that you did not cut out any of the video footage in those 2 time periods, correct?
Correct. It's motion activated. That's the only piece.
You provided the state police with the raw footage as it existed in your possession at that time, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you knew that the raw footage was only saved for between 30 and 60 days?
That one is less than 30. Yes.
Right. Now, as of early February, when you were dealing with the state police, you knew that Karen Reed had been arrested and charged in court, correct?
I do not recall if I had that information.
You knew that there had been a police officer found dead on the lawn of another police officer in Canton?
At that time in February, I believe so.
And that likely would have been discussed when the state police called you?
I do not recall the conversation other than asking for video footage for Washington Street.
And I'm sorry, sir, if you could just keep if I can't hear you, I guarantee
Sure.
you that these last jurors can't hear you. Could you
No
just
problem.
repeat that last question?
Yep. Again, when in the conversation with it, we had the dates and the timeframes, and anything else relative to it, I do not recall specifically with
Oh, okay.
conversation.
So you don't have a memory of why you were being asked for this?
Correct. I know it was for a motor vehicle accident. Who and what, I do not recall if that was ever mentioned specifically.
Okay. And you would agree with me that as the IT director, you had the ability, if you wanted to download the footage onto some hard drive to preserve it, if you wanted to do that?
Yes.
Did any state trooper ever ask you to download and preserve that footage so that it would exist longer than that 30 to 60-day period?
No.
And so it's fair to say you did not do that, correct?
Correct.
You complied with what they asked you to do.
Yes.
Now, skipping ahead to April 6th of 2023, you were contacted by Michael Proctor, a state trooper investigating this matter, correct?
I do not recall.
Do you recall Michael Proctor asking you to provide to the defense in this case the same raw footage you had previously provided to the state police?
No.
And you don't recall telling him that you couldn't do that because after 30 to 60 days, the footage is gone, correct?
I had a phone call with what I thought was Trooper Dunn asking for another copy of the data and telling him that I did not have it and I couldn't recreate it.
I see. Oh, so you assume
If it was Proctor, but no, I thought I was speaking with Trooper Dunn.
Trooper Dunn was the name that you remembered from February. Of
Correct.
20.
That was the first interaction I had.
And when
Yes.
they mentioned state police, you assumed it was the same state police trooper, correct?
Yes.
It's fair to say that once you shared the footage with the state police in February of 2022,
Mhm.
You didn't control what they did with it after that, correct?
Correct.
And you have no personal knowledge about how they preserved it or didn't preserve it, correct?
I'll allow it. Do you have any idea?
No.
And one last question. You cannot testify about whether any video was removed from the footage after you provided it, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Nothing further. Thank you.
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, sir, you are all set.
Thank you.
I do not, Your Honor, no. May we approach just on?
So
You are
Joyce,
unmuted.
in fairness, I didn't tell the lawyers that I was hoping to go until 4:30 today. And I understand, as sometimes happens with law enforcement witnesses, they get called away. So that's it for today. Now, next week, I would like to go as much as we possibly can on the days that we're here for full days. So Monday is a full day. I would like to go until 4:30 if everybody can, with the shortened lunch hour. Tuesday, we're not in session. Wednesday is a full day again. We'll go right till 4:30 with the shortened lunch. Thursday is a half day, maybe even closer to 12. And Friday, we will not be in session. So those are dates that we gave you before. So we will get as much done as we possibly can during that period of time. Okay, so those same cautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it. You've got a few days off. Just disregard this case. Don't think about it. Leave everything here and have a great few days. We'll see you next month.
All rise for the court, please. Follow me, please.
All right, and for scheduling, I will actually see you over here for scheduling.